We are now streaming live on Facebook. For those of you who are joining us in the Zoom, a couple of quick notes. I will be muting you shortly, and that way we don't have any interference. And if you can put your computer screen in speaker mode at the top right, there's a button that allows you to switch from gallery to speaker, and speaker will just show you the person who is talking, and that way you don't have to see everybody else moving around or anything like that. It'll just allow you to hear Alexis talking. And then I've also enabled the chat feature, so you can chat over on the right, or you can hit the chat. And if you want to tell us where you're joining us from, that's great. We'd love to hear that. Or if you're with a particular organization, that's fun information for us to have too. You can also type questions in the chat for Alexis as she's going through, and I can read those off at the end. We probably will let her present and then take questions at the end is probably going to be the best thing to do. So, a few housekeeping things. We're going to start in just a couple of minutes. Hi, Kristen from Denver.
Kristen's from St. Joe.
She says she's tuning in from Denver.
She is, but she went to school here. I'll just like go ahead and pull up my video and audio. How did you end up in Denver?
I just right now.
Kristen,
I'm afraid my connection just chose right. Oh, dang it. 1 second. It's overwhelmed. Okay. So I ended up in Denver. Actually, I just moved here from New York City about a month ago. I don't know if anybody can hear that. Oh, yeah. Bummer.
I can hear you. I don't know if
Okay,
they can hear me.
Everything's frozen on my end.
Oh no.
Hey Alexis, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm good. Well, yeah, you're hanging in there.
Hey Alexis.
Hi Sharon.
How are you? Everybody else has these nice thin headphones, and I've got this massive audio thing going on.
Well, you're just like official.
Unfortunately, I'd rather not have to have it to hear everybody.
Right.
Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to be muting everyone's microphone, and we are live streaming on Facebook. So welcome to our Zoom presentation. My name is Sarah Wilson. I am the Executive Director of the St. Joseph Museum. And one of our museums, the St. Joseph Museums is actually an umbrella organization for 5 different museums plus a library and archives. One of our museums is the Black Archives Museum. And we have with us, I'm grateful today, Alexis Clements, who has been doing some research on some of the photographs from the Black Archives. Alexis is a photographer living currently in St. Joseph, Missouri. Her photographs have been exhibited, I guess, all across the world, even in Athens, Greece, and Colorado. She has been teaching at Highland Community College, but she's also taught in Colorado. And so we're very grateful to have her with us today. She's a neat person, and I can't wait to see her perspective on these photographs. So Alexis, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And let's see.
We're going to share that. Does everybody see that okay? Does that look right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So this whole situation is very new to me. So let's see how this goes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get the apologetics out of the way first. I am only a specialist when it comes to the topic of photography. It's what I have my master's in, and I've been teaching that for, goodness, like 13 years now. The one thing I do want to point out is that I have limited academic abilities when it concerns the topic of race, which is a good portion of what this lecture is about today. When preparing materials for this lecture, I aimed to locate as many sources from Black historians, artists, and authors as I could. It can go without saying that the majority of reported histories have frequently been from a white perspective, and the history of photography is absolutely no different. Updated versions of the textbooks that myself and other photographic educators use, they do make an effort to focus on the social uses of art by diversifying their roster of contemporary artists to include more people of color. However, there's only few examples provided in the discourse that include Black inventors, scientists, or early practitioners of the medium when photography was first beginning. So I'm going to use the images from the Black archives located at the St. Joseph Museums to explore photography's origins and discuss how the medium has been used to illustrate concepts of race and its significance in forming an image of selfhood. All right, so here we have an example of a daguerreotype. It's important to note that the search to make images really long precedes the discovery of photography. And this begins with early cave paintings in France and Spain well over 40,000 years ago. It wasn't until the invention of the daguerreotype, though, that there was a viable process to attain an exact likeness without the use of drawing or painting methods. The term photography is derived from two Greek words that literally translate into writing with light. And using the aid of light-sensitive materials and the science of catching light inside of a darkened box or chamber, we're able to produce an exact image by mechanical means. However, the struggle laid in ensuring that those images to become permanent upon a surface, so something that doesn't fade or deteriorate over time. So, after the death of his partner, Joseph Niepce, the French set designer Jacques-Louis Daguerre had a breakthrough and was able to make permanent the light from a camera obscura in about 1839. The daguerreotype, which is frequently quoted as a mirror with a memory, was a highly detailed photographic process that applied light-sensitive chemistry upon a highly polished copper plate. This process created what is known as a direct positive image. Basically what that indicates is that there's no negative. So once it's been processed, the image is positive, and right then and there you see it as it is. This also makes it a one-of-a-kind object. The daguerreotype was very detailed, but also could appear holographic when you alter the viewing perspective. So if we were to hand hold this image on this slide, we would kind of see almost like a ghostly image as we shift it. When we view it directly in front of us, we actually see a reflection of ourselves, hence the mirror with a memory metaphor. What the daguerreotype did was make this process possible that ordinary people could have their likeness copied without the expense or the time dedicated to having their portrait painted. Because Daguerre made his process open for unrestricted use, he ushered the way for the first portrait studios and photography in general as a business throughout Europe and in America. Daguerreotypes of African Americans are considered relatively uncommon. And even rarer is the sighting of professional photography studios that maintained and administered a photographic business with an African-American proprietor. One of the most renowned Black photographers and daguerreotypists was James Presley Ball in Cincinnati, Ohio, in about the 1840s. His customers were mostly white, though. In the 1850s, Ball went on to collaborate with other African-American artists depicting views of the American slave trade. He also eventually toured Europe, where he had the opportunity to photograph Queen Victoria and Charles Dickens. One of the nice things about a daguerreotype is that it comes kind of packaged in this very elaborate case. So it's very much this kind of precious object that invites you to peer into it and have an intimate experience. We just don't see that kind of presentation with photographs really anymore. All of our interactions with imagery now is little pixels on a screen instead of a tangible handmade object. So the daguerreotype had some restricted characteristics. And although landscapes and scientific images were being made, the daguerreotype's ability to render moving subjects was particularly lacking. Exposure times were lengthy, and blurred movement could be recognized in the resulting images. Additionally, daguerreotypes were fixed using harmful mercury vapors, so the term mad as a hatter also applies to photographers. In the 1850s, the English inventor, Frederick Scott Archer, began to use medical collodion to carry the light-sensitive silver salts onto plates of glass, iron, and tin. These new processes were less toxic, more light-sensitive, and for the most part, just as detailed, if not more, than a daguerreotype. The wet plate process could also provide positive and negative images, resulting in reproducibility. The process could also be developed within a portable darkroom. However, the catch was that the exposure had to be conducted when the plate was still wet with chemistry and developed immediately. So the collodion process was the photographic technology that documented the American Civil War. And here, I believe this is an example of a wet plate image of Amos Stillman, pictured with his wife, Elizabeth. He was an honorably discharged veteran. Stillman was assigned to the Company D of the 70th Regiment of the United States, Colored Infantry, and found himself in the 1st Colored Infantry at Fort Scott, Kansas. So I speculate that this particular image is probably what is known as an ambrotype. Ambrotypes were collodion images made on glass, and they had a black backing behind them. What that black backing did was result in an image that appeared as a positive. Some were displayed in metal frame cases, very comparable to a daguerreotype. Without the black backing, the glass is actually transparent and reveals the picture as a negative. Lighter and less fragile substrates were substituted for glass, and these included plates of blackened iron and tin, which many Civil War soldiers carried, usually pictures of their loved ones or something they would send back home to their families, pictures of themselves dressed in uniform in battlefields and so on. Tin types are typically called ferrotypes, so ferro, the root word for tin. One of the things to note about the collodion process, when you look at this image, the skin looks really leathery, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the process has kind of it renders UV light very strangely, and therefore things that are blue will tend to kind of wash out. So if you photograph a person that's heavily tattooed with blue ink in this process, those tattoos would become particularly invisible. Also, if you look at landscape photographs from this time, then skies are washed out, and because of that sensitivity or lack thereof to UV light and blue light is the reason. So by the late 1800s, photography unfolds from a medium of professional practitioners towards growing into a genuine democratic art form. The 1880s and 1890s simplified the photographic system even further with the creation of the dry plate. And the dry plate process basically allowed for pre-coated photographic plates that could be stored for later use. This technological advancement stabilized inconsistencies of the process, eliminated the requirement to travel with a darkroom, and made it necessary to expose and process photographs immediately. The Eastman Dry Plate Company began mass producing this new technology, and it became the professional photographic choice into the early 20th century. This image is of the St. Joseph inventor, Charles Baker, and I believe it's probably printed from a dry plate negative, which was for an article published in 1904 issue of the News Press and Daily Gazette announcing Baker's advancements in radiant heating. Baker created the Friction Heat and Boiler Company, where he employed unskilled laborers and manufacturers to produce these heaters. Additionally, Baker also founded a home for the ex-slaves in the city, which is on the right side of the slide. One of the things I really enjoy about the portrait of Baker here, showing off the image, is it has many qualities of painting. Just the painted backdrop, how close they are to the background, kind of reducing how three-dimensional it is. I really love these kind of staged images. I actually really also like this kind of like line or wire that divides the frame, kind of splitting the image almost into two separate photographs. So shortly after the addition of the dry plate, Eastman produces the first Kodak Brownie #1. And I'm sure almost anybody that has come across an old camera at a thrift store has one, has seen one. It's just a little tiny box with an opening in it. The motto that was assigned to the marketing was, "You press the shutter, we do the rest." The Brownie was a small and portable box camera that could be handheld. It came preloaded with a roll of flexible film, allowing for multiple frames per roll. And once all the frames were exposed, the user just simply had to mail the camera back to the Eastman factory for processing, printing, and reloading, and they would send it all back to you. Before the Brownie, cameras were essentially very bulky and unwieldy. Only single planes or plates of glass could be loaded into a camera, and tripods were absolutely required. So from 1839 to 1888, these obstacles kept cameras out of the hands of the general public and amateur use. So once the Kodak Brownie was released, we witnessed the rise of vernacular photography and the snapshots through depictions of candid moments of domestic life. The Kodak was primarily marketed to women, who became the storytellers of their families and essentially the chroniclers of their time. So since the discovery of photography, photography has been used as a means for documentation. Now, I believe it's naive to consider that what is placed in front of the lens to be considered an objective image. Susan Sontag writes that this naivety is dependent on how a photograph is identified or misidentified. And I would go even further to, what our personal relationships are, how we've experienced the world. All of that goes into interpreting images. So in the next few slides, I would like to address why we make pictures, what we use pictures for, and why it matters who is behind the lens, operating the camera, and who is viewing the image. So the act of photography is innately voyeuristic, and though it is possible to obtain a candid moment, there are differing levels of construction, leaving the medium never genuinely unbiased. So these levels of construction can be simply what the photographer chooses to include or omit from the composition, to an elaborately staged performance for the camera. When we document inside of our social or cultural groups, the resulting images can be very empowering. We photograph ourselves to be recognized. That is what the potential of our photographic legacies provide, and why photography has become the primary vehicle towards self-representation. We want to be seen. We want to bear witness to our lives and give evidence that we exist and that we matter. This is what makes the family photo album so mesmerizing. It is the story of our experiences, and it's a story of experience that we are in control of, and we do regulate our narratives. Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth understood these implied characteristics of photography. Both commissioned photographic portraits of themselves to promote Black accomplishments in America and Europe. By doing so, the historic figures eliminated the victimhood that was often depicted in the hands of white image maker and publisher. By taking hold of their photographic likeness, they freed their own self-image. On a larger scale, releasing their cultural image from perpetuating demeaning commodity. In doing so, they became positive icons for future generations. Contrasting against the colonial sideshow at the 1900 Paris International Exhibit, W.E.B. Du Bois exhibited celebratory pictures of Blackness. He chose to display scenes of domesticity, work ethic, and piousness, thus reshaping the understanding of Black identity for the public. If you're not familiar with the colonial sideshow, it was literally a human zoo. So anything considered a group of people that are not white, that are considered others, and they would be put on display like animals in a zoo. It's pretty horrific. So what I like about these images is that these show dignity, okay? These are obviously people that are comfortable being in front of the lens. They don't feel like they're being judged, particularly the one of William Neal here. I love just kind of his self-assured resting on the arm of that chair and dressed really well and taking great pride in who he is. So the story of Aunt Jemima is essential to the history of St. Joseph. For those of you that don't know, the pancake mix was invented here in 1889. And its boxes marketed a post-Civil War image of a smiling Black woman wearing a kerchief and scarf, offering up plates of pancakes. The image was the stereotype of the mammy that white households often employed during this era in American history. This likeness became a cultural symbol and eventually took on a different appearance as time went on. Photographs have a way of living a life of their own. And there are many ways that pictures can be oppressive. Yet the collective endorsement of what is considered appropriate changes with each generation. Today, most people would find this 1927 image of Aunt Jemima with a group of white cooperative club members as unacceptable. In 1927, this was just an established and acceptable experience of the era. Being in social isolation during this pandemic, like many others, many of my friends on Facebook have posted their old family photos, and this kind of led me to go through some of my own. And in doing so, I noticed an image of my great-great-grandmother on Halloween in 1953, dressed in blackface as Aunt Jemima. I asked my family about this image, and the answer I received was the usual, just kind of well, that was just the occurrence of the time. It's completely benign. And I agree that this was likely seen as a friendly behavior in the Missouri of 1953. Yet, I do not believe that similar photographs are entirely innocent or rid of racist associations. Now, the reason why I feel this way about this particular photograph that I found is that it is dated right at the precipice of racial tension in the US as the civil rights movement was beginning to gain momentum. My family photograph, as I interpret it and through the lens of my 21st century thinking, is that these may be examples of very early microaggressions, which are typically defined as insinuated or nonverbal statements of indignity. So when photography was invented, the scientific community embraced its abilities of documentation by producing pictorial archives of African and Native races over the globe. The photographs posed subjects nude, stark upon backgrounds for viewers to objectify. And you would never see a white colonial person ever depicted this way. Psychoanalytical theory suggests that this defines what is known as the gaze. The scientific pictures of the late 19th century used the concept of the gaze not only for scrutiny of ethnic differences, but to categorize physical deformities, mental illness, and criminal characteristics. More often than not, these subjects were of subjects that were depicted or considered on the fringes of society. So they weren't part of, the primary race, or they were, put into a mental institution or whatever the case may be. The St. Joseph Museums has plenty of images that depict this with the Glore Psychiatric Museum. So we see a return of the gaze to portray images of property, which turned out to be depicting images such as slave ownership. However, the period between the American Civil War and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement are some of the most violent and exploitive uses of the photographic gaze seen in the documentation of lynching spectacles. Like a violent crash that we come upon on the roadside, it is hard to turn away. There is an instinctive urge to gawk at such horrors, so today I've chosen to exclude examples of lynching imagery, not only because of its, sensitive and painful content, but because these sorts of images can still be held as commodities by certain groups. The interactive map presented by the Equal Justice Initiative cites Missouri as having the second most documented incidents of lynchings outside of the South. Those cases were 60 in total, and one of note occurring in St. Joseph, across from the Buchanan County Courthouse and jail. Another quote attributed to Susan Sontag is that photographs of atrocity illustrate as well as corroborate. The University of Massachusetts in Amherst has an image in its collection of the 1933 lynching of Lloyd Warner, who was the Black man that was lynched and was accused of attacking a white girl. Warner was taken from his cell, hung, and set on fire. The photograph by Alton Blackington depicts a smoldering body surrounded by a crowd of white spectators. Images of lynchings were made into postcards and sent to family and friends, as if the mere photographing of the event wasn't vulgar enough. So the last area of racial disregard that I'd like to address is one that pertains to the shortcomings of color photography. Striving for the rendering of color in images from the onset of photography was something that presented hurdles for scientists. There are many documented attempts, but the resulting products usually ended in color photographs that were not stable. The colors would shift or fade, and it really wasn't until the 20th century that we had reliable color film stocks. Color was the medium of advertising and generally considered garish. Color photography was generally shunned for artistic purposes until the 1970s, when they were first exhibited as fine art in a museum. With that being said, the film was also produced to render white skin tones. It wasn't until the need to depict chocolate or dark wooden furniture in advertising that color film was adjusted to represent darker shades. Today, light meters and autofocus really haven't changed too much, and the technology still struggles to identify darker subjects. The Kansas-born photographer Gordon Parks knew the power of photography, and in the fight against poverty and prejudice, he went on to produce images that depicted civil rights, people that were living on the fringes in other countries. He grew up in a segregated era in Kansas and eventually left. He is the Black photographer that most people are aware of. Even better is that he is from the region that we are in. So to produce one's own image is vital for any group. We have examined what can happen when that is taken into the wrong hands. So depicted on this slide are Lucille Potts Warner and her group enjoyed a meal at Casa Loma, which was a popular Black-owned restaurant in St. Joseph. These are the photographs that anyone could hope for to be remembered. If we contrast the photos on this slide to the previous slide of Aunt Jemima, we see images of people at ease and in essence, free to be themselves. Again, back to that idea of self-assuredness for the camera. So for the remaining slides, I'd like to end with images that are of positivity of the era of desegregation in St. Joseph. Missouri banned slavery in 1865 and began giving free but segregated public education. In 1875, the local census reported 570 Black children in the district, but a colored high school was not open until 1885. It was named Bartlett High in 1904 and served as the high school for African Americans until 1954, which was the year that the St. Joseph School District desegregated. Bartlett High was equipped with all Black instructors and was praised by its reputation of students who went on to become doctors, lawyers, and other highly valued professions. Even after its use as a school, Bartlett High continued to serve the community as a resource and recreation center and renamed after Horace Mann. As a community space, civic leaders such as the boxer Big John Lucas and the influence of heavyweight Joe Louis, or Big John Lucas and Joe Louis, I get those kind of mixed up, organized outreaching programs for disadvantaged youth. John Lucas went on to become St. Joseph's first elected Black City Council member in the late 1980s. Photography, as we have seen, has a turbulent history, particularly as it pertains to race. Still, its silver lining is that it can educate us about our collective past. Photography also authorizes any group of people or individuals to forge their own narrative or control the representation of their likeness. So in concluding, I'd like to make note to the title of this lecture, which is a slight modification referencing an 1854 abolitionist text titled God's Image in Ebony. So I took out the in and made it is. Making this modification meant to convey that every group deserves to recognize goodness within their own likeness. And that is what I have for you guys today, and a list of things that I would recommend if you're interested. The documentary Through a Lens Darkly is really great, and it's produced by African-American artists and historians. Definitely informed me of things that I was not aware of in terms of Black figures in the history of photography. A list of Black photographers that are incredibly talented that I love. And then just some other books or further reading. Pictures in Progress is a really great one. It's edited collections of essays about photography, particularly Frederick Douglass, who used photography quite a bit. And If You Can Handle It Without Sanctuary was an exhibition that was put on that does display lynching photographs. It's kind of difficult to look at, but there are some value to seeing that work and understanding it. Okay, so now I will take questions. Hi, Sarah. Unmute yourself.
I am.
Yay!
I'm trying to switch my screen around as well. So thank you, Alexis. That was tremendous. I'm almost kind of speechless, actually. Hoping that some other people maybe have some questions. And if you do, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask that question, or you can add a question to the chat. One question I have for you, Alexis, is looking at the images that you have displayed and knowing that I sent you the original images, yours look better than what I sent you. How did you do that magic?
I didn't do any magic. I just put them on the slide. But also, I try to utilize the maximum amount of screen space with imagery, so that's part of it. Yeah.
Did you have
feeling like you're holding out on other images that are probably just, more important and interesting too?
You think that I'm holding out on images?
I do.
So the Black Archives Museum, the St. Joseph Museum has
a lot
of images in our collection. And like anything at the museum, I will say we have a vast collection. And my estimate is somewhere over 200,000 objects, archival material, photographs, books, documents. So because we have so much at the museum, I generally would say that we need more research always done on the collection. Mm-hmm. We just it's a tremendous resource. And it's wonderful to have the opportunity for someone like you that really has the background and the knowledge to come in and look at just some items in our collection and give us a new perspective on that. But yes, I'm not holding out. I'm willing to share. How much do you want? I'll keep sending things.
That's fine. I like to look at stuff. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, this was great. Does anyone else? Hi, Megan. Do you want to jump on and do you have something to share?
I don't have anything to share, but I have a question for you and Alexis. The Charles Baker photograph was so silky and so beautiful and soft and clear on the screen. And I'm wondering, because I've used that photograph before for the Pronto Cafe, and mine doesn't look that beautiful. I'm wondering, I've never seen the original photograph, and I'm curious, like, what is it and how large is it? And what did you give Alexis to use? Like, what form did you give Alexis that image in to use for the talk?
Well, so my guess is that there's a very, very good high quality image of Charles Baker online that you can find. I think if you even Google the Charles Baker images, I think there's a very much higher quality than what we actually have in our collection. And that's probably the one that I gave to her.
Okay. Have you seen it before? Do you remember it? Like, is it 8x10 or 5x7, or do you remember anything about the original, or just no?
I'll look for it after and email you the link to it. And I think that will be the best, because I think it's maybe like a 4x6.
Mm-hmm. It's it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. I know Alexis says she didn't work any magic, but she did a really, I mean, like, they look so much better than the ones that I do.
I promise.
They look, the images, particularly like the two kids jumping on the trampoline, that came out really nice in your presentation too. But that was a high quality series of photographs, and I think when I was picking out images for you to look at, I was looking at pretty good quality images if we could have those.
Has the museum looked into digitizing more of this content, like to make it available online, or for researchers kind of like looking into certain topics? Or
Sure. So my philosophy up until a month and a half ago has been that we digitize for access, not for preservation. Because once you digitize a lot of things, you have to have a plan to sort of migrate that digitization, and it becomes something that you have to manage. And so we have preferred to make sure that we're preserving really well our collection. And we haven't made our collection, certain things that people are very interested in that get researched a lot, so that we don't have to handle them and we can preserve the originals. We will digitize those. We do digitize most of the photographs that we have coming in, like if we're accessioning a new photograph, if we get a new collection, we tend to digitize those and then kind of strategically go back and digitize other things. But we don't have an online searchable database for our photographs. And now that we're doing things more virtual, and we didn't have virtual programming up until recently either. So the pandemic has really allowed us to shift and adapt. And I think that we're doing well. Like, being able to produce programs like this and share them with people across the country has been amazing, and is something that will likely continue. And we're also working with, we have a lot of people who want to volunteer from home right now. And so if we can provide resources to them, we're happy to. So that's kind of how this project came about, was just, if you're interested in aspects of our collection, we're happy to share them. But we don't have a strategic plan to digitize them and make them available at this time. So it could be something that we shift to.
Yeah, it's a big undertaking, so I totally understand.
Are there any other questions?
I just wanted to share, I think, for the thing about the Galore Museum, Alexis mentioned the interactivity with the viewer and the photography, and I was there, I think, a year ago, so I hope I'm remembering it right. I think there's a picture of, there's a yellow chair in the hallway that patients were tied to that have holes that they would urinate through. And by that there is, yeah, which is awful, but you don't know that. There's a yellow chair there, and I'm there with my 8-year-old son. And up on the wall, I believe there's a picture of all those chairs kind of like in rows. And I believe there's an explanation how the patients would be tied to those chairs and sort of left there, and then they could just pee through the chair. Is that correct? It's something like that. It was so
Yes.
bad,
So-
horrific. But my son sat in the chair. I loved how the picture's there, the chair's there. So if you're there, it's just a chair in the hallway. You might be tempted to sit in a chair until you look and realize, oh, and then you jump up in horror. It reminded me of, as in Dachau 2 years ago, when you're in a room and then there's a picture of the room you're in filled with bodies. And so it was just a really neat, not neat's the right word, but effective way of sort of interact, not just looking at the photograph, but you sort of became part of it, and it was an experience. So I thought that was a neat part of your museum. And Alexis, thanks. I like how you brought up the point of sort of the meaning being created as people interact with the.
Right, and actually the museum shows some really good examples of kind of what I was talking about that relationship between who's behind the camera and conducting the images and getting the I guess the agenda that they want out of it, at complete disregard of who's in front of the lens. You have those photographs, or a reproduction of the Descheny de Boulogne photos of the guy getting prodded to reconstruct facial features. I think Darwin used those as well. They're incredibly painful to look at.
So I can speak a little bit to that, Mary. So when I first came to the St. Joseph Museums, I came as the Galore interpretive planner, and the museum at that time had gone into that space, I think around 1993, and I believe I was coming there around 2013. So it hadn't really been much updated in about 20 years. And the standard practice at that time was to not put pictures of patients on display because of HIPAA laws and, a concern for the patient's privacy. And I really struggled with that because we had a lot of amazing photographs in the archives, the Galore archives, and I wanted to show that we had patients there. And so if not, our photographs were just a lot of pictures of maybe doctors or nurses or empty spaces. And I didn't feel like it accurately depicted the state hospital. But I very much had these thoughts on my mind of exploitation of the patients and, not wanting to put the patients, in a human zoo on display as well. So, I had a lot of concerns. So one of my first interactives that I created when I was redeveloping that space, the director at the time had asked us to do an exhibit on psychiatric nursing at the hospital. Again, sort of the focus on the nurses and the doctors. And I said, well, someone, and I thought about deeply how important that that relationship would have been, like how meaningful that would have been to the patients, because that would have been a lot of times their interaction, like they don't get, a lot of these patients maybe didn't have people hugging them or touching them. And I think we can feel that now that we're in quarantine, how isolating that could be. Like maybe their family was not coming to talk to them or visit them. And so they would have a relationship with those nurses that would have been really vital and important. And so I was wanting to kind of pull that relationship out, and we had just tremendous photographs of the nurses nursing patients. And so one of the interactives I said was, what do you think as a visitor? Do you think it's okay to portray patients at the state hospital, or do you think that those images should remain, not on display? And we get mixed results on that interactive. We still have it up. We still ask our visitors that question, how they feel about that. Putting yourself in that position, like if you had been a patient at the state hospital, would you want to be remembered? And the same question with patient art, because we have a lot of patient art on display, and a lot of times the patients signed their pictures, and at some point, we had kind of covered those up so that we didn't have the patient artists' names, but then they're artists, and I wanted them to have that attribution. And so it is something in particular that we think a lot about at the Glore. And I think we've done an interesting job with it. Mary, thank you for your feedback, because yeah, we used to just have the chairs on display, and selecting those images and putting them on display with the chairs with the patients in it was something that was a difficult decision for me. I think we try to do it in the way that evokes interesting images, but is not, is not super gazy, I guess, to borrow your term, Alexis. But I guess those are my thoughts on that. Thank you for your feedback.
You're welcome. And I hope I clarified too. I felt like it was very effective because the chair itself was interesting, but seeing the picture, it really, no, it wasn't like a human zoo. It was, first of all, my child sitting there, and then realize who does have struggles with some mental illness, and looking at that, it was sort of like almost becoming one with it, and a lot of empathy and sympathy, and it made it real, and it wasn't just a display anymore that you could sort of be emotionally distant from. So I think you did a very nice job with not like objectifying the people, but making them very human, because all of a sudden you're sitting, you're not walking, you're sitting in their seat, So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Megan, you look like you're going to say something.
No, I just thought it was a beautiful, wonderful, interesting conversation and talk. Thank you so much, Alexis and Sarah.
Oh, thank you.
Are there
Hi.
I think as a little further study that I'm really curious about now, seeing all those images, and I really enjoyed, Alexis, that you pulled out those, first and foremost, those like studio images of the families kind of in there taking up space and like in their own space, in the same kind of wholeness that we associate with just studio images from that time. And it makes me really curious, like in St. Joe, who the studio photographers were taking those photos, and like where those places are specifically, and who those photographers were. So that's just kind of a rabbit hole of research that would be really interesting.
There's a lot of African-American photographers that nobody would ever recognize that those studios existed.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be nice to actually see more of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it take a lot of like local history sleuthing, definitely.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so the one thing I will say is, if anybody has I would reference the Mary Everhart collection of photographs, because we have some of those images, and those are at the Amon Carter. And Mary Everhart was from Leavenworth, Kansas, and I think she collected, 5 different photographers that were primarily Black, and sometimes those are referred to as the Black Dignity photographs. And there's over 400 images in that collection, of which I think we have about 20 that we have a small display on right now, and those are really good. And she's the closest thing that I know to someone who has collected local Black photographers, but it's Leavenworth, Kansas, and that's just about a half hour from St. Joseph. But the images, we don't have a corresponding collection of images really in our community that are that have been collected, and I think a lot of those are with families still, and we would love to have copies of those images so that we can build that archive, and we continue to try to work on that. Okay, well, Alexis, do you have any last comments?
I don't think so. You're all welcome to reach out anytime if you want to talk about this kind of stuff. I always joke, it's the only thing I know how to do, is to, kind of navel gaze and talk about photographs. So I always welcome anyone that wants to have that discussion with me. And I'm pretty accessible online at any time. So, yeah, I thank Sarah for having me and letting me do what I feel like I do best.
Well, thank you so much. It was great. And then only the last few things, make sure you check out our St. Joseph Museum either Facebook page or our website. We're doing a lot of virtual programming right now, so you can get connected to that. And then thanks, Alexis, and thanks all of you for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, talk to some of you later.